Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Sirens talk. This is our December talk. I am Brittany Postma, and today I am joined by Lacey. I'm so excited for this to finally be happening. Today we're going to be talking about SvelteKit for enterprise, if I can get my words out. But I'm going to let Lacey introduce herself and talk a little bit about her background before we get started.
Sure. So my name's Lacey Pevey. I have worked in insurance for most of my career. Currently, I'm the head of technology and operations for Falcon Risk Services, which is an MGA. It's sort of an underwriter of insurance. And I'm also glad we're finally having this talk that we postponed a couple of times, right? Because of your crazy travel schedule, and then I totally lost my voice. So it is.
I know, and I feel like I had the same thing, like the travel caused the sickness, and then I had the voice loss, and it's been a crazy journey, but I'm so glad we're finally here.
And it's actually our first time, I guess, sort of, I mean, not really face-to-face, but sort of face-to-face.
Yeah.
And I'm just, let me take the time to say I'm very grateful for everything you do. I'm a huge fan of SvelteKit, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. And I feel like every time I see news or something happening around SvelteKit, like you're always involved in some way. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a good thing to like maybe start on, is why you love SvelteKit so much and what brought you to it.
Sure. So my experience, being in one of the so-called boring industries, which is not an insult to anyone, I say that proudly. Insurance is definitely one of those so-called boring industries that I happen to love. I think it's very interesting. I've spent most of my career focused on financial lines, which, I say is the cool part of insurance. There's really no cool part of insurance, but it's directors and officers and cyber insurance and, like the really interesting stuff. And I focused mostly on enterprise apps. And so what I mean by that is, a lot of people think of web apps, they think of like Twitter and Gmail and very consumer facing Netflix with, millions potentially of concurrent users. And the experience for most people, like with the apps that they use on a day-to-day basis to get their work done in their jobs, these internal developed apps, very, very different, right? And so that's where I spend most of my technology experience. And, and a lot of these are built on a very old tech stack type framework, going back to the late 90s and early 2000s, PHP and ASP, and I'm really dating myself, .NET. It was ASP, right? Everything server, like round trip for any sort of user interaction. And that is still the de facto standard, right, for enterprise apps. And so I really love SvelteKit because to me, it's as magical as like PHP was back in the day, right? With the power that it gives you a small group of developers, which for these internally developed apps, it's usually a small group of developers, very limited resources. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to devote too much investment for an internally used app by 100 to 1,000 users, right? And so SvelteKit to me gives me that magical feeling of you can do so much with this tool that's open and free. And so I'm a huge fan of it. Um, I mean, we'll get into more some of the reasons why I think it's sort of the next evolution for, a lot of these apps that we still see today, 20 years later, that came of this era, because that was the giant leap forward then. I really think that, 10, 20 years from now, we're going to be seeing, all of the new enterprise apps that were developed and a lot of the rewrites are going to be in SvelteKit. And I mean, I think SvelteKit's leading the way, but now we're seeing things, like Next in their most recent conference, right? Doing a lot of the same things with server side, right, by client side, that make these a lot easier to develop for small teams for basic enterprise apps.
Do you think SvelteKit is leading the way for new enterprise apps being rewritten right now?
I think so. I've told I in the SvelteKit Discord, when we were like live chatting the next conference, and I was like,
Yeah.
look, they're already copying Svelte. And some people made the comment that actually, obviously, as Rich being in Vercel now, there was some internal sharing along the way. So I'm not going to get into who did what first. I think that SvelteKit was the first to actually release some of this functionality that I think is really interesting, like around the Forms API, and just around the ability to so easily do. So for an enterprise app, you really want a lot. First of all, these are basic CRUD apps generally, right? So technologically, we're not talking about doing anything super fancy like, Figma, images in the browser, or anything like that. You're not pushing the boundary in terms of technology. Everything is, you're creating a record, you're updating a record, all of that. But where it becomes very complex is a lot of business rules and logic around. You think about for financial institutions, banking, certainly insurance,
Mm-hmm.
52 jurisdictions of insurance regulations and rating algorithms and things like that. I think that what makes SvelteKit really interesting is the ability to do all of that server side for security purposes, right? You want all of that done on the server, role-based access, really firm controls around your data,
Mm-hmm.
and everything around that. And that's the reason a lot of these are built the way they are today with PHP frameworks and things like that, where it's very server-side focused. What makes SvelteKit interesting to me is that it's created in a way that it's really easy for developers to do that server-side generation right next to, like in the old days, if you wanted to, you could, like if you're Gmail, right, you could accomplish the client-side interactivity and have the server-side security by using things like Ajax, WebSockets. This was beyond the reach of your typical, small insurance company that wanted to build a claim system, right? They're not going to build that kind of interactivity pipeline. They're just going to round trip it to the server and have everything
Yeah.
server based. So I think that giant leap forward is the way that SvelteKit is designed from the beginning to say, okay, you have some, side by side, you have your page that is designed to be, run in the browser right next to the endpoint that's designed to only be run on the server, and you can control that. In the early days, it was a little less clear because of the whole context module thing,
Yeah.
right? But I think it's moving even more in the direction of making these lines very, very clear. They're right next to each other, but they're completely separated, and you have a lot of control over what's happening with your data.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that the new server files and like allowing you to keep your data private and know where that's at, know it's running on the server, and then have that UI just right next to it. And it kind of gives you superpowers a little bit to like be able to do those things. And I know we talked a little bit before about too that it makes you able to make the right choices by default. Like you're using the platform and you're not doing the wrong thing because it's created in such a way that it really doesn't allow you to do that. It forces you kind of to do the right thing by default.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm a huge fan, a bit of a fangirl of Svelte, just because I think a lot of the design choices, they just make a lot of sense, right? We had already decided to use SvelteKit for our most recent project, which is an in-house claims management system, even before the Forms API came out, right? And so we had just started the process. We built it in about 2 weeks. We had just started the process, and then the Forms API was released. And initially, I was like, I'm not going to look at it, right? We've already started, not even going to look at it. And then I think it was Joy of Code. Oh, he's in the chat. Joy of Code. It was, I think it was, he did a video. It could have been someone else, but I do think that it was his video who was like going over the Form APIs, like, well, now we have to use it because it just makes so much sense. These tools that are just available by default to do these enterprise style apps. You just can't ask for a better tool set than the Forms API, because that's all you're doing all day long is you have a user who's entering information in a form. You need to be able to handle that with very complex business logic. You need a good way to organize that and maintain that. And you just really couldn't ask for something better than the Forms API.
Yeah, like you said, with a CRUD app, like you're dealing with forms mostly, like that's what you're dealing with. So you have to make sure that those forms and the ability to do multiple things with those forms, and the Forms API makes it very easy for that.
Yeah. I mean, this is I think I told you this before, the tweet by Simon V. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know Simon V, he tweets a lot about Tailwind CSS. Yes, this tweet. But he did this tweet about, his experience ordering a background check from this particular website. I think this is a government website, but It's a great example of exactly the types of apps that I'm talking about.
This
These
is my
enterprise
experience every time I do anything for the government or like for a bank or
Yeah,
anything.
yeah. And I mean, it's just the perfect illustration of, enterprises use them because they're easy to develop and they work. They do what they need to do and they can do it securely because everything's happening on the server.
Mhm.
But the downside of that is this user experience, right? Where it's in this case it's just a few input fields, but in a lot of cases, like for claims or policies, I've seen entire pages of
Page, yeah.
100 input fields. And if anything goes wrong, like this is the kind of response you get, right?
Yeah.
And this is actually very good. It's telling you each thing. Like sometimes I've seen errors that are just something went wrong.
But
You're
there's
like,
no progressive enhancement. There's no like
exactly.
UI feedback for the user until like it's all gone. And then it takes all of your data away from you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the ability to have a framework that is really designed to make those things really easy. And enterprises aren't dumb, right? They're not giving users a bad experience just because they're mean, right? These are applications that may not be worth, investing having 100 developers work on it, right? You're going to have just a team of a few people, sometimes one person do it. And to have a framework where it has the defaults in the tool set that makes building a user-friendly application really easy, that it's just, I think it is a giant leap forward. And I do think that SvelteKit is an ideal tool for enterprise apps. I I've started using it, for what I'm developing. I know a couple of other people who are. You asked before, do I think that that's already happening? I don't really know, but I wanted to come on the stream to explain why I think it really is an ideal
We
tool for
can we
these
can
types of
hope and we can say that it
apps.
should be your next choice if
Yeah.
you're making an enterprise app in SvelteKit. And I do hear of more and more companies like starting to adapt it. And I know we're nearing 1.0, we're getting close and it's stable right now. We're in a release candidate phase. So there's hopefully no more breaking changes. And it's such a good platform to be able to create, like you said, like those user interfaces with the right defaults by just naturally doing that side by side with your server side code. And I love that. So I do have a question about scalability and like how to maintain these larger code bases, because even though they may be one form or whatever, it's not a small code base, I'm sure, for these companies. And can you talk about how easy SvelteKit makes it to maintain and how scalable that is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It gets a little bit into the sometimes contentious debate of, microservices versus monoliths and et cetera. I don't have any strong views on that. I do think that the companies that are really good at a microservices type architecture, um, it requires a layer of engineering management, and not just any engineering management, like really, really good engineering management. Like the companies that I've seen that are really good at it, you can fly with microservices. The companies that I tend to work with are not companies that are, pure technology companies. They don't, I mean, let's just be honest, they don't tend to have that level of talent, right? Like they don't have a Sarah Drasner at an insurance company, right? That's going to be able to manage that. And
I
so
love that you just threw out Sarah Drasner. I'm obsessed with her. So,
and
yeah.
when it goes wrong, it goes really, really wrong. Because what ends up happening is you have someone who's like, well, I and the other thing that happens with these enterprise apps is like they're being used to transact business. Insurance regulations change all the time. Banking, like these things, they're living applications. They do change all the
Yes.
time. And you have a situation where you can't change X because then you'd have to change Y. And then that depends on Z. And then nobody knows how Z works anymore because, those people,
It's legacy.
it's, you end up with a structure that like you can't move, right? Instead of helping you move faster, you can't really do anything. So unless you're really good at that type of a structure, it can be very, very, very bad. Um, then you have the opposite, which we see a lot of in enterprise apps. Like for this reason, you see enterprises sticking with this monolith style structure,
Yeah.
which usually works well enough for these types of applications, right? But then you have all of the problems, the typical problems that come with the monolith, right? With not really being able to tease that apart and assign it easily to different developers and to scale that. I think that SvelteKit and what some other frameworks are moving toward are, it provides a nice alternative to that, like this component focused structure. And especially where you can have, if you're in Netflix and you have this microservices style architecture, you're going to have a whole team of front end people and a whole team of back end people. And it's totally different teams. And it's fine that they're not working on the same thing, right? But these types of apps are different, these enterprise apps. And you really want your front end right next to the back end. And then the division is component style, where you can easily, maintain that and work on that in tandem. You don't have to worry about what Z is doing and what Y is doing. You can just work on X and change the back end and the front at the same time, especially with tools that we have today like Prisma that make that really easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I love Prisma. The developer experience of like interacting with databases in kind of your JavaScript style code is just so great. I love it. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I used to work for Granger and we did micro front ends. And so we had different teams that worked on different things, and we had no communicate or very little communication. But if we needed something like an API, that was a different team. We had to go and like communicate with them.
Submit a ticket with all your requirements, right? And then it
Yeah.
goes through the telephone game. And, by the time it's like Jane needs to run. And then by the time it gets there, it's like Bob needs to walk. And then no. It's like back and the game.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a great point, that it will allow enterprise apps to keep those things together, but still separate. Like you can work on those things in tandem, like you said. And I love that point.
We have in the claim system that we built on the view claim page, right? There are multiple parts of this page where you see the policy section, the basic claim information section. There's a section for uploading documents, section for to-dos, section for diaries, etc. And to-dos and diaries, same thing. Section for to-dos, section for notes. And each of those components, right, on the back end, right, are structured in a way that you could change that, even though it's the same page, right? You could have someone working on those things, like that component together, the front end and the back end, and someone else doing something completely different to a different section of the same page. That's not magical, right? Everybody talks about it. That's kind of this microservices design. That's the whole Netflix philosophy. But to be able to do it in a small enterprise app it's a really nice way of working.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right. Trying to think of what the next topic might be. I'm looking. So I know we've talked about the types of businesses that might use enterprise. So like we're going to have banks, insurance companies, maybe like your utility companies, the government, forms and things like that. What size are some of these teams that we're looking at for these companies?
Yeah, it really varies. But I think even for the largest ones, people would be surprised how small some of the teams are, because we're also not talking about, even for a fairly large insurance company, right? Your number of concurrent users for a particular system is going to be in the hundreds, right? Not millions. It's going to be in the hundreds. So these teams tend to be fairly small for internally developed apps. It can be one person. It sometimes is one person. It can be 10 people, 20 people. You rarely see a lot more than that. It's why I think the maintainability comes in, and it's really important, because when you have that size of team and you get hit by some unexpected turnover, right, it could have a really big impact on the maintainability.
Absolutely. And I think that was a great point that you made, that it allows everything to kind of be clear and together, so that you're not depending on that one person that knows everything, and then something happens, unfortunately, and then you have to bring in a new person to that small team and figure things out with his legacy code base that's like just a nightmare to go through. So yeah, that makes sense.
In most of these types of applications, a lot of the development time is spent not so much on the technology. They want just an easy to use tool set, and not even so much on the architecture or design. They're not, because they know they're not doing anything fancy, right? It's a CRUD app. A lot of the time is spent on these really complex business rules. and how best to incorporate that logic and to make it maintainable. When you think about rating an insurance policy that might be based on 100 different variables, and it might have different variations state by state, right? All of that is a basic CRUD app, right? You're just inputting information, you're calculating something, you're spitting it out. And yet it's the business logic that makes it really complex. So I'm not trying to demean anything by saying it's a CRUD app. It's having a really good way of developing a CRUD app means that you can focus on a way to organize those complex business rules that in a way that's more maintainable.
Yeah. And I mean, the CRUD app is like the foundation of the web, kind of like that's what we put this stuff out there to do. So, I mean, it's not insignificant at all. And I think that it's really important for these companies to be able to do those things in an efficient manner. And I'm just thinking in my brain, like maybe we need to create a template that we can like give to these companies that use a SvelteKit and be like, here, you can create your app with this template.
I actually think that that's a wonderful idea. The To-Do app is a really good start, right? Because that's your prototypical CRUD app. But, having an examples that are, that look enterprising, boring, if you will, it helps people feel like, oh, this is for me, right? It's not just for playing around with, it's for like actual business applications. Microsoft usually has that on lock, right? Because they have a certain style that makes businesses think, well, we need to use this because it's for us, right? Like it looks like it's for serious business people, right? So I think having good starter templates that are like that, it couldn't hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think allowing businesses to customize too and add in their colors and their logos, like my design system background will come into that. But I'm like, that just sounds like such a great way. And you said the To-Do app, and I miss having the To-Do app. I love Sveltel and it's great in the demo app, but I wish we had the To-Do app back. I went looking for it the other day and I
did
can't
it go
find
away? The last time I did the demo, I usually use the skeleton, but the last time I did the demo, it had both side by side. I didn't realize they had taken it out.
Yeah, I think it's completely out now. It's just Vercel in there as instead of the To-Do app now. But yeah,
Start a petition.
I know I need to like go back through the commit history and find it and then put it out there as like maybe even a separate template. But
I know there was some concern that it used the remote API, right? So people were thinking it was slow. So maybe that's why they once they got, the last time I did the demo app was when they were still working on the Sveltel. So I guess once they got that nailed down, they took the other one out. I do miss it. I mean, that's how I first started doing anything in SvelteKit, was basing it off of the To-Do app.
Yeah, because I mean, it is just your basic CRUD app and it shows you how to do everything that you need to do kind of to grow from there. And people make fun of like the To-Do app, but it's a powerful tool.
Great. Yeah, that's what when you first, for my purposes, for the apps that I tend to develop, when I'm first trying out a framework, that's exactly the type of app that I want to do, is how do I hook up my database? How do I start making changes to that database?
Yeah. And you mentioned Prisma too. Like, is Prisma a tool that makes it like easier for you? Because are you working with multiple databases? Like, because that's one thing Prisma does, right? Is kind of
make it a whole different stream. I love Prisma. I try to keep it simple and not work with multiple databases. Typically, it's one database that's our database, and then other data sources that we would need to interact with, it would be via an API. And if there's anything we need to store, we'd then take that information that we got from the API and store it along with our record. So yeah, we have a relatively simple Prisma implementation. I guess technically we don't even really need to use Prisma, but I really like it.
But it's just so nice that
Prisma. Yeah, I tend to work the opposite the way that a lot of people work with Prisma, and I guess that you should work with Prisma. Like I tend to, because I'm old school SQL, right? So I tend to set up the database in the actual database, using some sort of other, manager for that. And then when I install Prisma, it's, I'm just doing the DB pool, right? And if I need to change my data structure, which happens all the time, right? As you're developing, I'll make the change in the database and then pull it, in which I know most people work in the opposite
I
direction.
gotcha. So you're not working with like your schema file and you're not doing any of that with it. You're just using the database. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's perfectly fine way to use it too. But I think that makes it the case for the portability, because Prisma allows you to kind of use that same code if you ever did need to switch databases.
It's great knowing that the Prisma file is going in the Git repository, and that if anyone ever did need to recreate, the database, they could. Or it's really great for testing too, right? You want to set up a test environment. In the old days, you'd have to, it's two parts, right? You have to move over the code base, and then you have to export your schema and then import the schema. And now it's like you can really do it all in one step. It all goes to Git. And then once you set up a test environment, you can just easily, do that using Prisma. It's great.
Yeah, awesome. Well, another way I think that maybe we could talk about making it easier for these enterprise companies to make these good decisions. Did you want to compare at all like SvelteKit versus like maybe no or low code tools and how those might help, or how any of this plays into these companies' decisions?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question that I get asked a lot, because they're like, well, if we're going to take the time to recreate this really old aging application, why don't we use one of these no code, low code tools? And some companies go that way and have good success with it. I haven't seen or heard of or chatted with anyone who's been really blown away by that experience and really got the lift that they wanted from it. Maybe in the future, as these tools get better. Right now, the way that a lot of them are designed, it's like the tools themselves are designed for developers. So you really have to kind of know how it's a funny use case, right? It's like they're designing these tools for developers who know how to build it themselves,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason don't want to.
It's almost like they're missing a key point there, that like maybe these aren't built for developers. They're built by developers, but they're building for the wrong market. Like they don't understand their user.
I think so too. I think they're going to have to make it much more wizard style, or like right now, the tools that I've seen really couldn't be used by someone who doesn't have the ability to develop themselves using a framework, right? Once we see, and I think we eventually will, but once we see tools out there become available that really anyone could create this enterprise style app, I think that might change. But right now, we started out, and I won't name any names, but we started out evaluating 2 or 3 to see if, like, hey, could we use, because for startups, you get free credits, right? You get all these emails. It's like, okay, great. I'll try it out. If you're going to give me free credits to use this tool for free, I'll try it out. And we just didn't get very far, because you still have to hook up your database. You still have to, like, a lot of the creation of the app is in the structure of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the UI, right? As you talked about, like that's one of your favorite aspects. And it's in just the maintaining of all this business logic. And these tools just don't really make that any easier.
It seems like they're missing kind of the composability of the harder applications, like something like maybe Uniform would help with, where you might have I don't know if they have content management systems a lot in enterprise, but content management system, you might have a database, you might have to connect all of these separate things together, and a no-code tool might help you get the front-facing piece, but you still have to make those connections and compose all of those pieces together. And that's a really difficult thing. Clark made a comment.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. I'm like,
yeah,
they just said it a lot better than I could explain it, but that's exactly what I meant.
Yeah,
Talking about
exactly.
business logic, it just I haven't seen a tool yet that allows for easy incorporation of that in a way that's easy to maintain. Yeah. Like if you literally want to do a to-do app, great, it's there for you. But if you want any logic around that, which you need, it's the minute you start talking about a bank or insurance company, it's not about the basic credits, the logic around it. And I haven't seen a good low code, no code tool for that yet. Maybe. We'll see.
Exactly. And if you don't know who Clark Sell is, he runs That Conference, capital THAT, that conference. They're in Texas in January and Wisconsin in the summer. I think it's in July. And they do a great job. So go and get your tickets for that. 80% of the work is in the last 20%. Yeah, exactly.
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very true. We actually had a question, and I'm kind of curious about this. And I think they mean like really like front end style, like design system type thing. Like what UI framework do you recommend? Like, are we going material, like carbon?
Yeah.
Are those the things we're talking about?
So this is another, I've already mentioned the dreaded microservices word. It's someone was like, oh, you're mentioning the nuclear word. The other one that I'll mention is Tailwind CSS, because I know people have very strong opinions about that. I love Tailwind CSS. I'm old school. I'm old, right? As I've already mentioned, talking about PHP and ASP. So back in the day, that's how we did front end, right? Everything was the inline styles. You know, a lot of people talk about how we've come full circle. I feel like sometimes what we're talking about with SvelteKit, you know, other people jokingly say, like, you're coming full circle, right, with doing stuff on the server. In some ways, yes, but the benefit is that like now we have the best of that and then the best of the front end reactivity, right, together. And I think it's similar in my mind with UI is I always loved being able to have inline styles. The downside was that you couldn't do everything with inline styles that you could do with CSS. So everything moved to CSS. But then Tailwind is like, you come full circle. It's like, yeah, you can do it all in line. And now because of the framework, you can do things that otherwise you could only do with CSS, Flexbox and Grid and all of this great stuff. So I love Tailwind. For the most recent project that I did, I looked at a few of them. This was when Skeleton was very new. And there were a couple other that I looked at.
Stream with Skeleton. We have that next week. So
yay, I like them a lot. And some of the others that I looked at were clearly abandoned, right? Because Svelte was in this kind of weird transition period of like ramping up SvelteKit. And so a lot of people were just like in wait and see mode. So I made the decision not to use any framework other than Tailwind. But for a project that I'm starting now, we're looking really closely at Skeleton. I think we'll probably use Skeleton.
Awesome. That's really cool. I'm really excited to see more about it. I actually want to try it out myself too. I love Tailwind too, and I think it also touches on that portability piece because it's something that you can take with you to other frameworks, but I do love using it in Svelte and SvelteKit because we have those scoped style blocks, so you can use your post CSS syntax in those style blocks and still keep it scoped to the component without like flooding your markup.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what we talked about just being able to completely separate to a particular component on a page and then have someone work on the front end and back end of that without touching any other piece of that. I mean, Tailwind is just great for that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Daisy UI is another Tailwind one that kind of crosses to different frameworks. You don't need to have it in Svelte. It just uses Tailwind stuff. So that would be another option. I don't know really about like using Material or like one of the bigger design systems. I know Carbon does have a Svelte version of their design system, but I don't know. I don't know if there's another one out there that would be recommended, but I think Tailwind is a great choice.
Clark had an interesting comment here.
Yeah. People often don't consider the culture of the team and their customer base buy, build, ship. You have a comment on it?
Daisy UI. I think he's just are you getting to the ages old decision of buy versus build? I'm not sure what ship means in the context. Sorry, it's throwing me off a little bit. Buy versus build? Is that how you read the question, Brittany?
I don't know of that. So I don't. I was just trying to.
Yeah, certainly there's always a discussion. Anytime you're talking about an enterprise app of whether or not to buy this or build it, right?
Yeah,
it's
I
like
think yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the most expensive words in IT are let's just build it ourselves. Right? Yeah. It is true, right? You always try to avoid it if there's a good tool. On the other hand, I mean, my view, having seen a lot of SaaS offerings for the enterprise space, these are the types of SaaS that most people have never heard of, right? That are very specific to like insurance or banking, right? They have their niche. And a lot of them are annuities, right? Like they just print money because they don't really have a lot of competitors. There's no some of them are great. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them are really just not that impressive. And I wonder how they stick around and there's no competitive pressure. And I think it's because there are companies that have this culture of we're always going to buy, whereas other companies might have a culture of we're always going to build. And if you have the culture of we're always going to buy, the bar can be pretty low and it could be fairly easy to build something better yourself. But it's not in any one user's best interest to do that. And so they all keep buying from this subpar vendor who has their little niche that they're enjoying. It's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah, and Clark made another comment about the previous comment that loves Tailwind, uses it every day, but any kind of framework, you're buying it and the culture that goes with that. If you don't have that skill set, it might be great. It just depends. So you have to kind of buy into the culture of like Tailwind CSS has a very big love-hate relationship. Like,
yes, it's true.
You either love it or you hate it, and you have to buy into that. And that makes a lot of sense. But that's what helps you ship and trust your product. So
yeah. I think there is definitely always that consideration. It was pretty easy for me to make the decision to go Tailwind. There weren't a lot of hands on this project, the most recent one that I did. So didn't have to worry too much about turning off potential developers.
yeah.
But then I did hesitate when making that next level decision, right? Do I go with a UI framework? And this was when Skeleton was very, very new. And it was sort of that type of logic of, like once you incorporate it into your project and build on top of it, like you are buying it in a sense, right? And if they stop maintaining it or if it goes in a different direction, then there's work in the future to disentangle that, or you have to make changes yourself. There's definitely that consideration for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just reading the events discussion in Discord too. We had a comment in there. Etrain is using SvelteKit in enterprise. It's easy to adopt since a lot of enterprise teams are small and siloed. So the benefit is you get to choose your tech stack, but the disadvantage is there's barely a semblance of design consistency. And +1 form actions are great.
Yeah, this is very true. I think this is a really good point that we didn't touch on is that a lot of these apps are built by small teams within a large organization, right? So you talk about an AIG or Travelers, like these are very large organizations. Mm-hmm. They're going to have multiple internal tools, but you're going to have some small team that's doing this particular tool. And they generally have a lot of freedom to decide how to build it. Because a lot of times management doesn't even understand that these choices are being made. I mean, let's be honest. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the times they're even clueless as to like, they're like, oh, I hear React. Maybe we should use React. Yeah, because like, I have no idea what that is, but yeah.
So I am guilty of, like, sometimes I've gotten the question of, are we using React? What are we using? It's like, we're using a newer alternative to React. They don't even, and you find ways to explain, you have a lot of freedom, I think, a lot more freedom in large enterprise organizations with building these types of applications than a lot of people think.
I talked a little bit about this in the last talk that I did starting with Svelte, and I think when you're talking to people that aren't a developer, like you have to speak their language. You have to like change the way that you speak about things. You have to speak in like return on investment and like how much profit, how much loss is this going to cause? Like, what are the things that they're thinking about? And depending on like who you're talking to, it's going to change. But I think that's just a framing of your mind and the words that you say to these people to get them to buy in. You don't have to explain the framework. If you do that, they're going to gloss over.
Yes, I think so too. I think they're gonna, things that you can point to, like if you do have, most of the time they honestly don't care and they don't want to know details. Like I mean that's if you're an insurance executive, you're like, just tell me it's going to work, it's going to be on time, it's going to do what we need it to do. But if you do have someone who's interested in questioning, like why this over something else, there are a lot of things that you can point to with SvelteKit. The popularity of it, right? So if we do need to hire additional people, like there are developers out there who want to use SvelteKit. It has a great developer experience. And that's,
it is so close to vanilla that like you can hire a JavaScript developer and learn Svelte stuff in like an hour and a half.
Yeah. So that's a huge selling point. Lines of code is a huge selling point, right? Like they, even for someone who's not a developer, they understand that fewer lines of code generally means fewer bugs to squash, easier to maintain, and then, the user experience. It doesn't matter how non-technical a person is, they understand, the app from Simon's tweet versus an app that just works in a way that, as the kids these days, like it's a noticeable difference, right? So if someone's using a PHP or an ASP app, like the old school way of developing it, with no client-side reactivity, let's say it feels janky, right? It doesn't, like they, even if they don't know anything about how it's built, they know that it's not a modern way of building an app. It just feels different. And executives are the same way. Like if you show them an example of a SvelteKit app or a React app or anything else, side by side versus what they probably currently have or alternatives, like they can feel the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a great point. Well, before we transition, is there any other points you want to cover? Anything else that we missed you want to talk about?
I think we hit on all the high points that we wanted to go over. Is there anything you can think of that we didn't hit that we?
No, I think we did a great job, like covering kind of all the bases of like why you might want to switch to SvelteKit for enterprise, like what makes SvelteKit a good choice for enterprise, like what the UI frameworks are. I think we covered a lot of things, like why UI, the no code and low code tools might be not ready yet, and that the Forms API makes making these CRUD applications really easy.
Forms API is beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
I love all the great questions we got in the chat too.
I do too. Yes. Thank you so much. And if you have one before we finish up here, like please put it in and we'll try to get to it. I wanted to say thank you, Lacey, for coming on. I've enjoyed this time so much. It's great to finally like get to talk to you in person and have this discussion, because I think this is great. And I would love to have more of these. I feel like this is more podcast style. Normally our talks are just pre-recorded and we push play, and it might be easier for me, but I do enjoy talking to people too. So
I really enjoyed it too. I'm glad we were finally able to connect and to do this. I've been wanting to talk about it. So this was great.
Yes, this was so awesome. And thank you so much for coming. I do want to tell everyone in the chat, I have next Wednesday, so a week from tomorrow, we have a live episode of Svelte Radio that you will not want to miss. And you all need to keep your eyes and ears open for when we announce it. So next Wednesday, keep your eyes, ears peeled. See you all on the live episode of Svelte Radio. We have Skeleton coming on next Thursday to do a Sirens stream. So we'll be doing some more coding and checking out Skeleton. And I think that's all I've got for the rest of the year, but I'm kind of excited. I don't know if everyone in the chat saw, but I was laid off from Netlify last week. So I will be transitioning hopefully into a new position. I've got lots of applications out. If you hear anything, let me know. I'm trying to go and put some things in and get some things rolling, but it's unfortunate right before the holidays, but it is what it is. So we're hanging in there and we're making it through. So all right.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I'll be sending good thoughts your way.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate everyone. And I will see you next week. Bye.